When we established an online shop as part of our Better Burma nonprofit, we chose to prioritize working with artisans from disadvantaged and vulnerable backgrounds because we know just how hard it can be to survive at the margins of society in Myanmar. This includes people with disabilities, mothers who've contracted HIV/AIDS, civil servants on CDM, ethnic and religious minorities, and more. And so your purchase will not only help support their livelihood, but also go into our wider humanitarian and media missions as well. With that in mind, we invite you to please take a moment to visit our shop at betterburma.org/shop or alokacrafts.org. But now, let's get into the interview that follows. Audun Aagre, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Insight Myanmar podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we are speaking in Oslo, Norway, and we are going to be talking about your engagement with Myanmar over the years, which largely centers on being the former director of the very influential Norwegian Burma Committee, among other activities. And looking also at Norwegian Burmese relations and everything else that comes up through that. And so looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
Yeah. So let's start by telling us how Burma came on your radar and how you came to be involved.
Oh, it's a long story. I was attending a school when I was 19 years old, and the teacher, he was actually teaching Burmese students how to become journalists for Democratic Voice of Burma. So this was in 92, just the year after Aung San Suu Kyi was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And one of the first initiatives from the Norwegian government was to establish Norwegian Burma Committee, or Norwegian Burma Council at the time. And the first project for NBC was to establish Democratic Voice of Burma, inspired by Second World War and the voice from London, when we were occupied by the Germans. Then we had a free voice from London.
Tell us about that. Tell us about voice, because this is where DVB was inspired from. So tell us about that voice of London.
No, I mean during World War II in the whole world, but in Norway it was under occupation for 5 years, between 1940, 1 year after the rest of the world, and until 1945. And during the time of occupation, we need a free voice to get access to right information from the Norwegian government in exile, in basically mainly London. And they set up a radio station and they broadcasted it to Norway. And having a radio transmitter or receiver was strictly prohibited during the Second World War. And the thinking behind that was very important for founding Democratic Voice of Burma. Because after Aung San Suu Kyi was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, she also touched into the need to get access to editorial content, free voice and uncensored material. So then the idea of Democratic Voice of Burma came up, inspired by this event in Norway in the Second World War. And then things happened very quickly. The NBC was established, the idea of DVB came along, some of the key Burmese staff was identified and immigrated to Norway. And then the next question was how to get journalists to do the job, doing their stories from Thai-Burma border inside the country. And then my teacher, he was assigned by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to go down to the border areas where, students quite recently had fled from central areas after the 1988 uprising to the border areas, and he trained them in journalism. And then he invited me and 10 other Norwegian students to join him on a trip to the Thai-Burma border in 1994. Actually, one of the most famous Norwegian singers, he was also attending, and I was playing guitar at the time.
Well, who was that?
Yeah, so
who was the singer?
No, he's kind of a very, very important singer of he's actually a folk musician, and then he played guitar, and we went to the refugee camps at the border and play Irish drinking songs, because that was the only thing he could play and I could play. So I mean, that was a great experience and also very learningful. So the thing with the DVB at the time was they decided to set up a radio station in Norway and transmit news on shortwave radio signal from Norway. And technically speaking, that's quite complex. You need a lot of licenses, and at that time the foreign ministry just said, well, come on, let's fix this, let's just have a shortwave band and the frequency they can transmit, and they basically did that in a very short time. So that was my first experience with Burma. I was reading a lot of history and political updates, and I got engaged basically because I, got friendly with the DVB staff, and they taught me a lot of political context from Burma. I was reading a lot and traveling to Thai-Burma border, meeting students as myself. That inspired me and some other students at the University of Oslo to establish Burma Support Group, which was totally independent from the Norwegian Burma Committee. And mainly activists taking to the streets, demonstrating in front of the Thai embassy, because there was no Burmese embassy in Oslo at the time. So that was a little bit of background.
That's interesting. And being involved in those early days of DVB, you must have had a front row seat to really, really some interesting times and interesting conversations and innovative ways to try to engage in a rather difficult and challenging situation, I would imagine.
At that time.
Yeah, you're right. Those early days of DVB, yeah.
Now, these early days, there was a really small group of activists, and it was hard to break through in Norway at the time. There was very few studying Burmese politics, so we were just a few students taken to the street and becoming very close and also friendly with each other, and also with the exile Burmese community. Which at that time was quite few. It was DVB, and it was, a few Burmese in Norway. Mang Mint, who is now represented NRG, I think he was the second Burmese in Norway, and the only one attending the Nobel Peace Prize Awards when it was published to the Norwegian public.
Yeah. And what do you remember about those early days of DVB production and some of those challenges and aspirations as well?
No, I was quite close, because I started playing music with Mon An, who was one of the journalists and also a musician. So I spent quite a lot of time in the studio, and it was a really small studio, and they worked 24/7. And they had this very interesting and quite funny things that they had to make news, and then they had to put it on cassette tape, and then they sent it by mail or by train to the shortwave transmitter on the other side of Norway.
Oh.
And the funny thing is that sometimes they had to produce news before they happened, because it took some days before
really?
this cassette reached the destination. So at that time, there was lots of this convention about the roadmap and lots of discussion back and forth, and it ended always with the same, nothing. So actually they made the news once and just took the chance that this will happen, and something completely else happened. And at that time they had to take the plane to this to this transmitting place, and they had to record a new story, of course. But it was slow. It was not very good quality from the recipient side in Burma because it was shortwave. But I mean, this immense commitment and engagement, and also the proof that people in Burma actually listened to these stories, that was for me an eye-opening moment and very inspiring.
Right, I can imagine, and this was really the post 1988 was really the birth of new independent journalism, which has lasted to this day. Irrawaddy, of course, coming out then, and DVB being supported here later, Mizima coming along, and so much more after it. But it must have really been something to be in those early days of this this new endeavor. And I should mention to listeners, we interviewed the founder of DVB, Chang Nine, your friend, for the backstory and history of how DVB came to be. We have a whole episode on it to look there, but I think it's also a value and interest to, as an outsider who kind of became an insider, to hear your views on just what that energy felt like of really those Burmese getting to a place of freedom and then being supported so generously by Norway, and then being charged with this responsibility of being able to gather news and get it to those that are so desperately wanting that information about their own country.
Yeah, and being a journalist myself, it has been very interesting to follow the path of the DVB, because in the first stage they were depending on the NCGB, the exile government. So there was not free journalism in the sense independent journalism. But slowly they realized that, well, we cannot just convey the message from the exile government. We need to develop our own story, our own voice, being independent journalism, the ethics of the press. So they really, follow the way that many other press publications did. I mean, in Norway, the press was party press for 50 years ago. So that development has happened, in most countries. And you may argue that some of the press in the US still is quite close to different parties. So I mean, they went on this path and became independent journalists, and with the press ethics and finding their own way. And I think that has been very impressive, because it when you have a strong enemy like the Burmese military, it feels natural to stand with the exile, like in Norway during the Second World War.
Right.
But when you develop as a journalist, you understand that you need a trust as journalists, not necessarily as a part of the government, and that makes you stronger. And I think the choice they did was very important and very right, because when Aung San Suu Kyi was elected, it was important to have a voice that could be independent, also from the former exile environment which DVB was a part of in the first place. So I think they really find an interesting way towards independent journalism.
Yeah, and that's a point actually that Chan Nine stresses on our podcast together that you reminded me of, that he references its founding as a revolutionary mouthpiece to at that time, to support that resistance. And the military is, of course, so bad that you want to speak about the atrocities. And then as time started to go on, this feeling that it was important, and this was not understood by many, but how he really stresses how he had to differentiate what they were doing from not just being a mouthpiece or a propaganda of the different resistance organizations, and that was a real shift they had to make.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, because I mean, we all do mistakes. Even if you have all the good intention in the world, you definitely do mistakes. And as a journalist, you need to report it. Even, it's kind of a dilemma, because if the bad side, they are so bad that you have so many stories of atrocity on the military side. Why should you convey a message of some smaller mistakes on the democratic opposition side? But that's important, because it's about trust, and that you need to respect your audience.
Mm-hmm. So I want to get into your other part, which is the Norwegian Burma Committee. And the other advocacy groups and lobbying groups that you also began to work on. And I'm particularly excited to get into this. I want to give some background that on our podcast before, we've spoken to Larry Doors in the United States, and talked about Larry's background in setting up in some of the early activism that came from the U.S., and then talked to Mark Farmaner about the UK campaign for Burma and kind of those early days. And I think this institutional history is so valuable to get an understanding of, because, everything where the narrative started to develop from there is kind of what we have inherited here today and what we're working with. And so the more that we can hear about some of those early days from US, from UK, from Norway, from different places, and learn about some of that early activism, because Burma really wasn't on the map anywhere before 1988. It was really the 90s where it started to kick into high gear. The more we learn about some of those things that happened there, they start to inform how we got to where we are now and how we might make more informed decisions. So with that background of kind of wanting to go back to that institutional history, which you were very much a part of, talk about that formation, the early goals, challenges, aspirations, and context.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important, because the starting phase defined NBC until the end, and it was very much about politics, because the founder Kule, he was very close to Aung San Suu Kyi. They had lived together on a mission. I think it was Nepal. And so they knew each other. And when the NBC was founded, it was founded as a council. The idea was that intellectual academics, writers should form a council, and that should be the core of working on Burma issues in Norway. But they decided later on that it should be a committee, because if you work with the NBC on a daily basis, you very quickly get your connections, you get more insights of what's going on the ground, and then it was a committee. But the thing is that it has always been about politics. I mean, DVB is an independent journalistic entity now, so I mean it's a part of the civil society, but it has always been very close to political actors. You may say that civil society, I mean, it's politics. Of course it is. In Burma there have been different kinds of civil society. I mean, the civil society very close to the military government, which kind of was organization but not working for political change. And you have the kind of true civil society that work for political change. But for us and for me as a director, it was always very important to take that history forward in reaching out to the political parties. So what I was really into was to connect with the NLD, with the parties from the ethnic minorities, because working with civil society it's easy, because I mean they do good. I mean if civil society would like to to advocate human rights, it's important and it's good to support it. A political party is more difficult, because I mean they are parties, they have agenda, they want power, so it's a bit more complicated to get support from both people and also governments, because it's more controversial supporting political parties. Right. On the international level, it was solved by inviting lots of different parties to the room and have some multi-party trainings, which is good. But what we experience is that you really need to work with, each party, because it's only in that way you could be honest about the problems inside the party and try to improve, because you will never do that if there are more than one party in the room. So we try to find an angle, working with the SNLD in the Shan state and different political parties in Kachin state, the Mon state, and almost all states. trying to develop a methodology to make the parties improve. Because our thinking is that, well, the day when you are elected into the government, it's too late. You need to get in an early phase and try to have this open discussion about what should a good party look like, how should we organize in the best possible way to represent the people, especially when you are a minority party and you need to form alliances. How do you do that? So I mean that was what we tried to do, and the reason for that is all about the DNA of the NBC, starting from the linkage with Aung San Suu Kyi. And also other, party members and individuals like Kontonu of the SNLD. So there was kind of the political side of NBC that I also found very fascinating and made me, apply for a job in the NBC when I did in 2010.
Yeah, and the work of NBC was largely, if not fully, supported by the Norwegian government.
It was funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Just to call on, the back in those days, it's a different situation now in terms of the international support, but that was quite generous support, I would say. You might provide further context, but looking at what the Norwegian government was doing with, firstly DVB and then this NBC, and then apart from the Norwegian government, but raising the profile of Aung San Suu Kyi at that time, which was a representative of Burma's situation through RAFTO and then the Nobel Prize. There was a lot of pro-Burma activity really centered here and supported here at that time.
Yeah, no, it was a generous support, and Norway was committed to support the democratic opposition. So Norway was very prominent in that sense because we are a small nation, but we had the Nobel Peace Prize, and that was very important for the opposition groups and also for Aung San Suu Kyi and her safety, I think. So Norway played a really important role in supporting the democratic opposition and also the DVB as the voice from Oslo. So that was kind of the first phase of the new commitment from Norway to Burma, and then it was on the side of the human rights, supporting exile organization, working for democracy from the Thai-Burma border, pushing money and projects inside the country to build capacity and empower the people. So that was at that time NBC and the Norwegian government worked very closely because we were in a way a branch of the foreign politics of Norway to Burma.
Right.
But that changed later.
Yeah, right. And we'll get to that change later in just a moment, but returning to your work with the political parties, the NLD, the SNLD, some of the other ethnic parties, what was the nature of that work and what were some of the challenges associated with those connections?
The nature of the work was basically to invite the political leadership, having meetings for some days, trying to discuss party programs. I mean, not instructing them how to make it, but I mean just having an open discussion and facilitate, how to do political processes with your constituencies, developing party programs. I mean, how should you as a politician be accountable to the voters if you don't have any kind of party program? And that has been a part of the curse in Burma, right? That you have individual-based parties. And you can basically say, well, I'm the leader, you can trust me, you vote for my party. But that's not a democratic perception. You need to develop some kind of contract between you as a politician and the voters. And it's not a surprise that, if you have been oppressed, you have been exiled for 20 years as a party, you lose contact with your constituency. So, I mean, it's a natural development that you don't have that contract because you have been out of the country for so long. And that's why it was so important to reignite the idea of the party structure, because when you come back, you also come back to your constituencies, and then you need to start thinking about how you should live up to what you promise you should do.
And this was the 1990s that this work was happening?
No, this was much later. This was after I started working in the embassy. But they did much of the same work. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. But in the 90s, that was more working with the NCGB, the exile government, trying to do much of the same, but in a very different political context, because at that time the parties was in exile.
Well, no, that's very interesting that you have that two areas to contrast. And actually, we had another episode I can reference back to that also touched on the subject. We spoke to Lito Arligi in the Philippines, that is part of CAL, the Coalition of Asian Liberal Democracies. And through their organization, they did quite a bit of training with the NLD prior to the 2015 election. And he talked quite a bit about what it was like working with former political prisoners that were now stepping into being able to take on more responsibilities and hopefully a freer country at the time. So, that's another really important contrast to bring to this conversation. But going to your work, so now you're talking about two different periods, two different groups you're working with. Can you contrast those periods and also give us a flavor and a taste of what it was like to be in an environment where you're working with these individuals that have the opportunity to really come and make substantial change in their countries, and yet are coming from a background where these things are largely just theories and ideas that many haven't ever seen put into practice?
Yeah, after I returned to Burma work in 2010-11 and taking a resident director in 2013, it was fantastic in the sense that you had the opening and everything could happen, and the parties popped up with a lot of supporters. At the same time, when you come from a situation where you have a very strong common enemy, and then it's more blurred because NLD won the election in 2015, and then the ethnic political parties need to kind of figure out how to deal with that, and the obvious solution was to unite. For instance, Kachin state, we work very closely with all the different parties there, because they wanted to merge, unite, because they realized that it's impossible to compete with NLD if there are 5 different parties in Kachin state.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because it's about personal prestige. It's about party flag and party history. So we discovered that it was very complex to actually succeed in working with the different parties in Kachin state. We had a team work there. I spent a lot of time there. Our chairperson as well, Christian Stokke, was also taking part of that conversation. And I think it was a very fruitful conversation, but in the end of the day, it was too difficult to unite on too short notice in time for the 2020 election. But it was extremely inspiring and very interesting and complex. But I mean, politics is not easy anyway, so that's a part of the deal.
Yeah. So you're talking about coming back to Burma at that time as the transition is starting to take shape. People have so many different views and perspectives on what exactly the transition was, the engagement of the international community, particularly the US, UK, and Norway in this case certainly played a role as well, and kind of the changes that were starting to go underway with Thein Sein and then Aung San Suu Kyi. So the obvious question to you is your thoughts and views on the transition, having a background of having worked in Burma post '88.
Yeah, I remember very well my first visit to Bangkok after I started working for the NBC, and I had a meeting with the embassy, and I was told that Aung San Suu Kyi was not popular anymore. She didn't have popular support. That was exaggerated and something that NGOs from the West had kind of invented because it served their interest and their purpose. And of course I was shocked, so I called to my Burmese friend in Norway in DVB and start reconnecting with those I knew from the 90s, and of course they said, well, this is wrong.
Yeah.
Where did they get this information from? So I think that was the initial shock for me, figuring out that, well, the second phase of Norwegian commitment to Burma was misguided and in my opinion also very wrong. That they based their understanding of the military as more popular than people thought, and Aung San Suu Kyi as less popular than people in the West said. So I think coming from that, it was a perfect illustration of the new Norwegian standpoint on the transition. And leaving that aside, if someone would like to change, if they would like to initiate reforms, it's good. I was not that critical to the Norwegian policies in that sense. It was good to talk to the military government. It was good to try to push them into further reforms. And Norway did a lot of good things in these days as well. But for me, the problem was that they kind of detached themselves from Aung San Suu Kyi and the civil society organization that was representing the democratic opposition for many years, but also in the current context. So they kind of broke these very important ties to very important politicians and civil society actors, and moved towards the civil society actors that was closer to Thein Sein's policies. I mean, Myanmar egress and the like, and that's okay. But when I talked about the distinction between the political civil society, making opposition and trying to create political changes, you had this group of civil society that was very close to the government, and that created some problems or some challenges. I think that was not good for the role of civil society, which it's all about frictions.
Right. So that was like a shift in Norwegian foreign policy that you began to see in Burma at that time?
Yeah, definitely.
Right. And then carry the story on from there, because we're starting with the very generous support of all kinds that we just laid out in the 1990s. And then as the transition starts to open, not just talking with the Thein Sein administration, but doing more than just having dialogue, starting to really shift towards them. And importantly, as you say, away from the background of civil society and NLD and other ethnic parties that they had been working with. And so carry the story on from there, because as we know, during the transition period, every year just becomes more significant and layered than the last.
Yeah. No, I remember a story I was told from the diplomatic circles. I think it was the Norwegian diplomat saying that, the story about the transition was the military flew from Yangon to Bangkok, and they saw all the lights over Bangkok. And when they were flying back to Yangon, there was almost non-lights. And the understanding from that was, well, we have been a failure. We did wrong. We need to change. So that's what I call the fairy tale. It's about a military that admits that they have been running the countries really badly, and they would like to change. But my interpretation of the military's intention was that they saw that there was so depending on China, they saw that they need more investments to come to secure that independence. So it's all in the open with the roadmap as well, that they would like to change as much as they have to be able to get more investments and more political dialogue with Europe and the US, but not if it means that you have to give away power. So I think also a part of the story is that the military actually played excellent political games. I mean, they was able to change. They had a process, and the process was not open, not democratic. It was directed from the commander-in-chief. But they was able to kind of maneuver into a sweet spot where that was kind of a white spot on the map for foreign investors. And the diplomats saw that, well, here we can actually have this opportunity to move a country into democratic direction, because it was the beacon of hope. You remember in that days, where you saw that, well, the rest of the world is going in the wrong direction. Myanmar is really moving forward, and as a neighboring country of China, that was unique. So it created some kind of euphoria that the diplomats from the West wanted to reach out to those in power, even though they had lots of atrocities in the past. And the idea is that if you move in investors and Norwegian companies, Western companies, you will build up a middle class, and that middle class will definitely not ask for power; they will demand it, and that's how you kind of establish a resilient democracy. So I think that was a part of the thinking from the Norwegian side, and also many other Western countries, which worked as long as the development went in the right direction.
So you've laid out that plan of development really well and really eloquently of what they were, of what the mindset was of some members of the international and Western community, and what they were hoping for and what they wanted to do. And also, hey, they might see it as a win-win for them, because if development is the key to moving the middle class beyond the point where they can come back, well, hey, maybe we can pull in from our countries and bring that development in. So, everyone wins with this, if only it were to fit together. And I also appreciate that you call it as the Norwegian fairy tale of, this is what the generals are saying, this is what they want. And so this is, of course, if you hear it that way, then it is this outlier of something that you definitely, and this is calling on Obama's phrase, you want to extend a hand to those that are not, don't have a fist or a knife in their hand, that you extend your hand to theirs and take it. So all of this kind of fits together neatly, if only so, though, right? So this narrative and this belief, this policy at the time, as this was unfolding and as this was happening, did you see the dangers and the cautions of this approach as it was starting to take shape?
Yeah, definitely. And as mentioned before, I think to try to commit dictators or military leaders to democratic reforms is important, and it's good. So it's not that part of the story that I have been most critical to, because Norway did an excellent job in many ways. Mm-hmm. But what they did wrong was to deconnect with the true democratic opposition. And I think that was a mistake on the short term and also on the long term perspective, because on the short term, Aung San Suu Kyi even was openly criticizing Norway in the Norwegian broadcaster in 2015, I think. And it was a very strong criticism that please don't only think about investments, also think about democracy and our political future.
To Norway, she was saying.
To Norway, and the criticism was extremely articulate. So it was no doubt that she strongly opposed the Norwegian political direction. So I think on a long-term perspective, the choice of Norway harmed the relation to the Aung San Suu Kyi government, because, I mean, Norway had been they have been very close to the Thein Sein government, and they got also a lot of benefits with investments from Telenor, from Statoil at the time, and SN Power with hydropower. So Norwegian politics and business went hand in hand, and it served the interests of Norway and Norwegians. But it did not serve the political relation with the winner of the election in 2015, which was NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi. So after that, the Norwegian government found themselves in a bit more difficult position than under Thein Sein's government, and that's an irony, because I mean we have been working for democracy from the Norwegian side for so many years, and then we put ourselves in a position where we have more troubles reaching out to the democratic political leadership than the autocratic political leadership. So that's quite an irony of Norwegian politics at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It sure is. And that policy of as the way they were engaging during that period of serving the interests of both politics and the government, and also business and corporations and investment, is that something that characterized Norway's engagement globally at that time, or was that unique to Myanmar?
Oh, it's hard to answer that question very precisely. I'm a Burma Myanmar nerd, but of course, I mean, political dialogue and investments go hand in hand, and Norway and the foreign ministry of Norway has as a part of their mission to try to pay away from Norwegian investors, and also investors that is partly owned by the state. So I mean, it's obvious that a part of the diplomatic mission's goal is to try to push for Norwegian investments. And it's sometimes hard to differentiate those two pillars of interest. But what happened in Burma, Myanmar, it was very intertwined and very interconnected in a quite strange way. I mean, we saw that the political leadership from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the state secretary went to the Statoil after finishing his term at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Norwegian ambassador to Myanmar went to Telenor just after Telenor had signed a contract. So it was a murky political time, I think, where the interest in investments and interest of political true engagement was a little bit blurred. So I think it was quite special in Burma, in the sense that Norway came from a very prominent position as a supporter of the democratic movement, and that's why Norway was such a high-hanging fruit for the military government, because if they was able to turn Norway, I mean, then you can turn any countries in the world. So the symbolism of turning Norway was very high. And how the Norwegian government and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I mean, positioned Norwegian companies to get contracts in Myanmar has been very interesting, and it has been investigated a bit, but it should it should have been investigated much more, because Norwegian directorates going to Burma to train the Burmese military government in how to write telecom laws just before Telenor won the contract. In a Norwegian context, we may be a bit naive, but we may think that that's no problem. But going to Burma, where you are so used to corruption, and that you give one favor and you get another favor back, the appearance of this intertwinement of politics and economy from the Norwegian side, it was easy to point to the fact that it was murky, and there may be some intentions behind it. Why did you say that as a foreign minister? Day one and day two, you got a contract for Telenor. So that kind of suspicion was a part of the democratic opposition's view on Norway. And that is something we should have anticipated and realized, and be a bit more cautious about before we ended up with this murky mixing of roles.
It takes so long to build up a reputation and to do it right and to be a trusted partner, especially in a place like Burma, where your reputation is everything. In the absence of a government or authority you can rely on, all you have left is networks and trust and local person-to-person connections. This is also why, just on another topic, why this dismantling of US aid is just so incredibly disastrous, because it's not a water faucet you could turn on and off. Once you damage that reputation, then there's a lot of work you have to do to build back up all the work that came before it, and it's really quite alarming to think of the turn of phrase that you had about if the military generals can manipulate or turn Norway, then given their history and their stalwart support in the past, then who's next, and what does that mean for everyone else? And I also find it curious that Norway is really known for prioritizing dialogue and conversation, bringing parties to the table. And so as they're starting to talk to this third way, Thein Sein's administration, which, as you said, you don't have an issue with, yeah, sure, talk. That's not the thing we're calling out for an issue. On the other hand, if you're all about dialogue, why are you then stopping dialogue with all of these other partners who clearly have a stake and a role to play? So yeah, you can go and increase the number of seats at the table, and that's a discussion. Some people would say you shouldn't even do that, but we'll table that discussion for now. But yes, to bring more chairs to the table is one thing, but to bring those chairs to the table while then limiting and pushing away all the other chairs that were there, that's not dialogue. So, that's something that I think is quite surprising. Do you have any idea why they would want to just throw away these connections and dialogue and conversations they've been having for all these years, and not to initiate or start a new one, but while simultaneously holding those, but to do that at the expense of the new conversations they were having?
Well, first of all, I think that my story is very different from the Minister of Foreign Affairs story. So I mean, there's lots of different stories out there and interpretation, and I think that the Norwegian government and the Minister of Foreign Affairs will definitely say that they just facilitate the dialogue, both in the peace process and also with the government on both sides, both the military side and the opposition side, but. Working on the ground in Burma, I know that the perception of that is very different. So I think it has been a question and discussion in Norway whether the Norwegian policy was naive or cynical. I mean, did they just worked with the side because they had this fairy tale approach, which would be an insult to a diplomat, because I mean they should be political very cautious about what they are doing. But the other one, if they are cynical, it's also not a good thing to be, that you actually worked very hard to position Norway because you wanted to have business concession and business agreement. And I don't have a fixed answer. I don't sit on the inside of the government or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but I don't think they were naive, and I don't think they were cynical. But I think in a way they was tired of what they called hardliners, and at that time, hardliners, it was those who believe that Thein Sein government did not move towards democracy. And Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they really believed that Thein Sein was moving towards democracy. It would take time, it may not be a full-scale democracy, but they were moving in the right direction, and they truly wanted democracy. But Thein Sein was kind of trying to maneuver between the commander-in-chief, and that was the story about the good Thein Sein, right? And I think they just got tired of NGOs criticizing Thein Sein, even though the Norwegian government believed that he did something good, and he was moving towards democracy in his way, but his intention was honest and true. So I think they just got a bit tired of all the criticism from those who didn't believe the same thing as Thein Sein and the Norwegian government at the time. I think the Norwegian government really believed that Thein Sein would move Myanmar in the right direction, and that the third force, Myanmar egress and the entourage around Thein Sein, they were right, and the others, including Aung San Suu Kyi and some of the NGOs working hard for human rights, they were wrong. So I talked to several organizations like Women League of Burma, working for women's rights, and they made a lot of reports documenting that the military, after the reform process, still did atrocities against women. And I went to that press conference where that report was launched, and it was just this is not right. I mean, seen from the diplomatic community saying, well, where are the proof? This is exaggerated. And, so I think it's hard to explain now, because now it's 10 years ago. But at that time, there was really this kind of polarized discussion. I mean, if you said Burma, you were a hardliner. If you said Myanmar, then you was kind of believing in Thein Sein's path towards disciplined, flourished democracy, or just democracy. So it was an interesting time to look back at, because it was so polarized. I mean, just one word, and you were placed in one group or another group.
So when you talk about that disbelieving of the report from the Women's League of Burma, that's an amazing anecdote. It's an amazing story. I've heard other stories that are very different, but in that same vein, that are that are in the context of a Western countries and international community simply not wanting to and refusing to believe something that was in front of their eyes, that comes off to me, less as wanting to deny something that they know is existing and cover something up, and feels more just like, can't we have some good news? Can't we believe that this thing is going? Can we not concentrate on these small little atrocities and just believe we're turning a corner because look, we've provided water here, electricity there, schools there, or we talked to this politician or this civil society initiative, and can we just believe this is going to be enough?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, we got a 50% cut for all exile organizations overnight. Right. And we argue that, well, these organizations, they are based in Thailand, but they are on the way to move into the country. All the projects are going into the country, but they just have to be cautious before they move into the country, because you cannot say that you have to trust the military's goodwill when you have been, escaping from atrocities in the past. You need to take your time before you move in. So, but that was not acceptable for the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, and I think that was it was a huge mistake. I mean, I think that sometimes what we lack in diplomacy is actually more empathy, that you should try to figure out how would you be in that situation yourself. For instance, I mean, during the Second World War, would we accept if US said, come on, just let the German rule, because I mean they will probably be nice, just adapt to it. Look at the economy. If you just work with them, the economy will flourish, and then you will have a middle class, and maybe in 10 or 20 years you may become a democracy again. I mean, we wouldn't accept that. Yeah. So I think that sometimes, even though the work of the diplomat is trying to see possibilities in politics, and that's a part of the job, sometimes I think we need to be a little bit more empathetic to those people we are trying to convince should do something out of a textbook in political science, that actually in real life is a hard thing to do, and also I think that could affect people on an emotional level. I mean, imagine your parents have been killed by the military, and you as a son, you should listen to a guy saying that, well, come on, you need to come over it because now it's time to reconcile, even though the military side never said sorry. Yeah. Of course, I mean, we should be very careful when we are demanding such a sacrifice from victims of atrocities.
I think that's so true, and I'm glad you give the World War II example, because I've been very interested in looking at, for the most part, and especially across Europe, how relatively recently societies themselves have gone through something somewhat analogous to what's happening in Myanmar, and just a couple generations removed, forgetting those sacrifices, those hard decisions, the messiness, the turmoil, the uncertainty, the unpredictability. And, looking at like the underground resistance to the Nazi regime across Europe, there were a lot of mistakes that were made. There were a lot of ugly things that happened. It's not justification and support for repeating that, but it's just, can you really be in a high and mighty position of looking down and telling to a society what they should or shouldn't be doing when they're in those circumstances that, our ancestors, our forebears, not even that long ago, were in those positions not so long themselves, and having to also try to navigate those. And I think there really is your call of empathy. I think that empathy and shared humanity is really missing from some of that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important point, of course. For instance, in the Second World War, we had some guys, we call them guys in the woods, because that was the resistance movement. They was not resourced. They was fighting an impossible battle against the Germans. And the English said that, come on, just give us a break, because every time you do something, the Germans will kill civilians. But they kept on pushing against the Germans, And after the Second World War, that was a really important part of the nation building. Not a nation building, but I mean the pride we took after the Second World War was in the guys in the woods trying to fight back, which was completely impossible.
PDFs, right?
Exactly. And a part of the Norwegian story is that it was the war sailors that actually did the difference, and they was not part of the political resettlement after the Second World War. So I mean, the war sailors really did an important work, but the boys in the woods, not that important, but extremely important for building the pride and saying that, well, we actually did a lot of resistance.
Yeah.
In real life, the resistance was quite limited, but the resistance was still important. And my point is that we should not say to PDF or those who are fighting the military atrocities that, come on, give us a break. Try to look at a long-term perspective here. You need to make business flourishing, and then you can have some rights afterwards. It doesn't work, and if you ask yourself it, I think you would be quite insulted if some outsider would tell you the same thing.
Yeah, I've quoted this on previous podcasts, but I was listening to a discussion with a historian of the French resistance to World War II, and he said something that I've never forgotten, and I think about this every day in relation to Burma. He said when the Nazi occupation in France was really at its peak, French members of society were limited to 3 choices of who they could be in the world. They couldn't be anything other than these 3 people: a coward, a bad guy, or a hero. That's all you could be. And the second part of this was that if you are not in this kind of context, you cannot know which one you would be. You can pray you would be a hero. You can hope that you would not be a coward. And you can be certain that you wouldn't be a bad guy, but you will not know until you get in that circumstance.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I think that's go for most polarized conflict, and most conflicts are polarized. So you have to take a position. And depending on how a war conflict ends, I think that will define where you are put in those 3 categories.
Right. So we've started talking about the Norwegian involvement during the transition period with sidling more on the Thein Sein side, but there's so much more to the story. There's the investments in Telenor and other things. There's the peace process, which they were heavily involved in. So start to share more of the story as it unfolds.
Yeah, I think I was very into the Telenor story from the start, because I was very positive to Telenor that not necessarily Telenor, but that the international Western telecom company should get access to Myanmar, because when I started working in Myanmar, as you probably remember, a SIM card, it costed like $150. I remember I bought my SIM card, and it belonged to a soldier that was unfaithful to his wife. So every time I entered Burma, I was called by the family of this wife yelling at me. And every time I arrived, and I was maybe gone for 2 months, so they probably was calling every day for 3 years. so I mean, it was the time was ripe for more competition, and if it was Telenor, Orange, whatever, that wouldn't be a big difference. But I was very supportive of Telenor, because they have an ethical standard, I thought at the time. So when Min Kunai and Pyeongchu from the 88 Generation Student visited us in 2012 or January 2013, I connected them with Telenor. And they had a good exchange and have a conversation. And every time I brought political leaders to Norway, I also invited Telenor to connect. So they was not only connected to the military government, but also the opposition groups and the NLD. And so we had a delegation from, that was 2013, from NLD and ethnical parties. And I brought a delegation to the CEO of Telenor in Oslo to connect and also enable them to be able to talk about concerns. So I was very positive to Telenor. I was quite critical to how they got the contract and how the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and play with the Norwegian directorates, giving advice for the legal framework of telecom. So it was a little bit murky, but still, at the time, I considered Telenor as really, the way they did things in Myanmar was really best practices. They reached out to not only the military government, but also talked to the NLD. They talked to the civil society. I linked them with the CSOs in the ethnic states and also the political parties of the ethnic states. And I really think that they understood the importance of good political analysis to get this right. So that was really a very good start, and you saw also that they had a lot of trust from the Burmese citizens, because Telenor became very big very quick. Partly because they did a good job, and partly because there was a Norwegian company and they kind of had the Nobel Peace Prize as a kind of trump card. So they did very well. We can talk about what they did not do so well later, but at that time it was Telenor with the telecom business, and they needed telecommunication and get people online. So that was very important. Another sector was oil and gas, and they also introduced Statoil. They won a contract, but they didn't find any gas, so they pulled out just before, because I think the shipping harbor was in Rakhine State, so I think they was quite happy about not finding any oil and gas, because that would be very difficult. So oil and gas is controversial, but it's offshore, so you don't kind of mess with local conflicts in the same way as if you are doing business on a local level. And hydropower, that was the third pillar. SN Power, a Norwegian company, state-owned 100%. They went into hydropower in Shan state, and they said they did the assessment and did not find any red flags, and not any political conflicts. And when I heard that, I was shocked, because if you're moving into ethnic states and you are going for some resource, you're capitalizing on natural resource, it's not settled who owns the resource. Should it go to the central government, which the central government would like it to do, or should it stay with the local government, the local state, which the political parties in the ethnic states would like to do? And it's definitely a red flag, because it's not settled, and it was war very close to the middle Yebuyo, the river in Shan state. So that all these different Norwegian economical investments, the climate neutral alternative of hydropower was definitely the most problematic project. And then number two was oil and gas, because oil and gas is shady because of the ownership structure as well. It led to a lot of profit to the military side. And the telecom, which was good for all sorts of reasons, because you need to get the people to communicate in a better way. So this kind of three Norwegians initiative, it kind of moved forward, but it was Telenor that was kind of the main pillar of the Norwegian investments.
So of these three investments, it sounds like the hydropower from the outset was the one that you really had concerns with, and the destabilizing effect and the way they were going about their business.
No, that's right, and we had a lot of debate in Norway, and we had good conversations, but it didn't change the outcome. That SN Power believed that they did the right thing, and that there were no red flags, and they could just move forward. But they failed.
How did they fail?
Because it led to a lot of conflicts. There were conflict there already between the Shan state armies and the military armies, or the Tatmadaw, but also because it led to a lot of frustration with that particular project.
Right, I see. And so we've looked on the side of the investment, and now moving to looking at their engagement with the peace process.
Yeah. again, I think that the Norwegian engagement in the peace process was well intended, and they was able to have a rig of ethnic minority CSOs and also political parties. Han Yang-wei was a part of it, who is, a smart guy, but also a bit controversial, also in the ethnic states. And it's not easy to be able to move forward with the peace process after all this year. So I think I'm not among the harshest criticisms of the peace process. I think they did a lot of things right. They had the liaison offices, and they were able to communicate between the military side, I mean the Tatmadaw, and the ethnic armed organizations. But it didn't work because it was perceived as a project that the military side took benefit of, and that it was unbalanced in how it was set up. But as mentioned, I think Norway did a lot of things right, but I think that they was a little bit more than just a facilitator of the dialogue. Norway also pushed forward the view of the military side, who was very articulate that we need to get a lot of money into the local communities to make them believe that the peace process will actually work. So I think that was the main problem, that on the Norwegian engagement it was not perceived as balanced enough. But I mean, peace processes are extremely difficult, and I think Norway had good intention, but they was not able to get that project balanced enough.
If they were to have engaged another way at that time, do you think that there could have been more progress, or do you think it was just all too much, too fast, too top down, too rushed, and marginal gains no matter how it would have worked?
Oh, it's hard to say. That's why I'm not a diplomat, probably. But I think on a general note, it's very important to be very balanced and very careful when you are doing a controversial project like MPSI, the Norwegian Peace Process Initiative. But it's hard. It was a lot of suspicion on each side as well, and it was a lot of political playing in the negotiations. So it's hard to say.
Right. Now, moving on to another part of Myanmar history, a couple of years later now, looking at the Rohingya crisis, when that starts to blow up, and the international response as well as the response from Norway. And as I understand, you also worked with the Speaker of Swedish Parliament at that time, and that you have referenced how Facebook, although Facebook had a huge responsibility, that you did have some issues with the UN fact-finding mission, leading to, in your words, some misunderstanding. Can you unpack and flesh that out a bit?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean the tragedy of Rakhine State and Rohingyas was terrible to see. I mean, it was devastating, and all my empathy is with the victims. So it's important to say that first, because I mean, when we are moving into political discussion, it's like it's important to state the fact that all this atrocity was really terrible, and it affected a lot of people. What I tried to do at the time was to look at the 1982 citizenship law, and I discovered that in that law it was a majority for the civilian side against the military side, probably because the military side hadn't really discovered it yet. So what I tried to do was to see if there were some opportunities of securing citizenship rights within the framework of the military's citizenship law, which was probably quite naive, because in the end the military will never accept that the Rohingyas will be awarded citizenship to Burma. But I worked with the Swedish Speaker of the Parliament at that time. He was quite close to Aung San Suu Kyi, and I also worked with some people connected on a high political level in Burma, just to explore whether there was some possibilities. But we find out that it's too difficult, it's too controversial, and it's in the end of the day, it's about political will and what the military sees in their interest, and they will never accept such kind of compromise, even though it was linked to a law. But that was an interesting exercise, and that was before 2017. I think it was 2016, maybe 2015. There was also a narrative that Facebook led to the atrocities, which I have sympathy for, because I think Facebook did a terrible job in Myanmar, because they just earned money on targeted advertising without any kind of understanding of the local context, not any understanding of local languages. So there was lots of hateful speech on the platform at the time, and Facebook didn't do anything about it. I think when the UN fact-finding mission pointed to Facebook as one of the responsible for the exodus and the killings, it's right when it comes to the communal violence, and some Rohingyas was killed by Rakhines or other civilians, but I think that it was the commander-in-chief who ordered the military to go to the local communities and start shooting and make sure that the Rohingyas fled to Bangladesh. And that was not a Facebook thing. That was a deliberate political move from the commander-in-chief, and he said it himself that it's unfinished business from the Second World War. So I mean, it was intention, and he did what he could to take out as many Rohingyas.
We should mention from World War II, unfinished business, I assume, because the Rohingya were with the Allies, while a lot of the Burmars are with the Japanese. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and that there was a lot of killings on both sides, both Rakhine and Rohingyas, and that the commander-in-chief believed that, well, we need to take them out because they have been making so much problem. So that was actually also an indicator of intent when it comes to the discussion on genocide or not.
Mm-hmm. Right. It was such a horrible, devastating situation all the way around, and definitely there's no disputing the military carrying that out, but it was a perfect storm in the sense of Facebook carrying hateful messages, and the NLD and a lot of the Burma democratic activists for so long not really having all that much love or sympathy in their hearts for the Rohingya at that time, which maybe they weren't the ones that were shooting the gun, but and so they're not culpable in that way, but also not quite a clean slate either.
No, it's true, and I think the democratic opposition did a very bad job in taking a stand for the Rohingyas at the time, and I see that many politicians that didn't take a stand at that time actually now is very open that they should have been more articulate in 2017 and also before. So I think that's also a tragedy on the political level, that too few spoke out too soon. In the same time, I think that some of the international criticism towards Aung San Suu Kyi was a little bit misguided, if I may say so. I mean, I met her and talked about this issue 2 times, and I also share concerns about her personal view on the Rohingyas' right to citizenship. She is also a part of her time, and that was not. It was simply not good enough. But I think that some of the international criticism directed to Aung San Suu Kyi also was a little bit misguided, and the reason for that is that, well, first of all, the power sharing between the military side and the civilian side definitely means that it's the military side that take all responsibility and for security issues, and it was the military that at gunpoint shot, killed, and made all this Rohingya flees, and At that time, most of the international community criticized Do Su for not taking stand. But, you know, she could not really do anything with the military when they decided to push the Rohingyas out. So that's one thing. The second thing is that, you know, when the International Court of Justice invited the Burmese government to defend themselves, I mean, they didn't take into account that, you know, the civilian side did not order the military to do anything. Still, they invited Aung San Suu Kyi. And Aung San Suu Kyi, probably out of vanity, she accepted because she would like to stand up and just defend what they did in 2017, which was a political failure from NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi's side. But still, it should have been the commander-in-chief that had to defend himself, because he was responsible for what was going on. So I think that some of the criticism was partly built on the fact that people believed that Aung San Suu Kyi was in power. And Aung San Suu Kyi never said anything that could illustrate or indicate that she was not as powerful as she was according to the constitution. So it was a catch-22. Then Aung San Suu Kyi didn't have all the powers, but she never said that she didn't. And the military could just, you know, kind of hide behind Aung San Suu Kyi, and she was kind of going out there in the open. And of course she was criticized, and the international community held her responsible for what happened.
Right. I'm really curious, going back to the two encounters you said where you did approach Aung San Suu Kyi and express these concerns, what was her response?
I cannot really go into details, but she kind of questioned the Rohingya side's narrative on the right to have a citizenship of Burma. And it was all, you know, the story, the history of, you know, splitting borders, which the British did, and that some were on the different side of the border. And it was all this narrative of you know, not being a part of the ethnic nationalities of Burma in the first place. And of course, given the fact that the constitution gives some rights to, at least on the theoretical level, give rights to ethnic nationalities of Burma, if there are many within a constituency, to kind of be a part of Burma and also take control. That was a perfect storm for the military to say that, well, look what happened if we give citizenship, then they will just take over one province and they will take it to Bangladesh. And Aung San Suu Kyi did not say that, but I think that many had that kind of fear that a Muslim minority will take a part of Burma closer to Bangladesh.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's interesting that in her response, there are two things that come from that, two threads. One is that she expresses doubt in the Rohingya story, and the other is that she expresses hesitancy or even a distancing from the idea of citizenship for them. So I think that is telling, unfortunately. Yeah. But then another layer of this Rohingya crisis, which brings in Norway again, is Telenor and the internet there.
I mean, Telenor was very loyal to orders coming from the government, and basically did what the government told them to do. And sometimes you have to do that if you should be a part of the business environment in the country. And sometimes you should oppose because it's not right.
So another thing that I want to come back to as we continue telling this evolving story is you had set up the early stages of Telenor involvement, which in concert with some of the other investments was more on the benign side and was providing very good and useful services. As Telenor then continued, and then as the coup happened and the turmoil happened with that, Telenor eventually left, but left under very controversial conditions, and conditions that we still don't know really fully, but I expect that we will in time. But what can you tell us about Telenor's departure and some of your concerns surrounding that?
Yeah, I think, as mentioned, that Telenor entered Myanmar in the most responsible way, and they departed in the least responsible way. And the reason for that is that they decided to pull out of Myanmar and sell the company and leave all the data behind. And as we know, data, location data, metadata, where you have been, who you have been talking to, at what time, it's a proof that you have been involved in something that you shouldn't, if that's what the military is after, and they certainly are. So first of all, we was very worried that Telenor was giving the military government information on where certain persons were at certain times. That's a problematic thing because it could lead to arrestment or even killings of persons. And we were even more concerned when Telenor decided to pull out and leave all the data behind. And at the time I was in several meetings with the Telenor leadership about this, and they said that, well, they need to follow the rules, and they had to leave the data behind, and that they had a local storage in Yangon, a server. And I was a bit intrigued by that because, you know, we are now in 2025, and at that time, 5 years ago, it's completely possible to delete a server from abroad or from distance, and I mean that's how you manage computing these days. So I mean, I think it was a terrible thing to do because they put so many people that had confidence in not only Telenor but also Norway. They put them on extremely high risks, and these data, it could be used for 3 years ago, it could be used now, and it could be used in 10 years. So it's kind of an immense resource for intelligence to take out opposition groups or individuals and put them in jail or even kill them. And we were extremely vocal about that, both me and several parliamentarians in Norway and former prime ministers and researchers, saying that, you know, first of all, this could actually be devastating for the opposition as a whole. And we talk about the Second World War, and in Norway it was important to delete the archive, paper archive of the labor movement in Oslo, because the Germans definitely understood that the labor union were opposition group to the Nazi occupation. So what the resistance movement did was to just bomb the whole building, to delete all these files, because it's so valuable for oppressors to have access to that file. And today with digital data resources and intelligence tools, you can just use that information to take down 88 generation student, NLD, civil society actors that involved in the demonstrations. So I think that's one of the biggest embarrassment I have as a Norwegian. It's the total lack of responsibility when Telenor moved out of the country, and I think it's almost hard to forgive what they did, given the fact that they put the whole democratic movement on risk.
The main question there, and you might not have an answer for it, but the main question is why do it? What did they get out of it?
No, I mean, that's a good question, and I've asked myself the same question many times, because they didn't get a whole lot of money out of it. They sold it to a Lebanese company that worked together with several, or at least one Burmese company. So they didn't get the money. When I talked to Telenor about that, they said that, well, they have to follow the rules. And I said, well, you cannot really follow the rules when you're dealing with a dictator and the oppressor and an actor that is willing to do whatever it takes to take out the enemy, which is the democratic movement. So I really cannot understand it. They also argued with the safety of the employees, but I know that the Burmese employees wrote a letter to the leadership saying that please delete the data. And then they argued with a Norwegian director that was kind of, some kind of hostage in Myanmar. And I don't have the detail about that story, but I know that all directors of international company in a certain period after the coup, they had to report and apply if they should leave the country. I'm not sure if it was different for that director, but the thing is that I believe that they could have done it differently. I think they could deleted the files in some way or another. And I could not see any attempts of doing the right things, nor from Telenor or from the government, because Telenor is partly state-owned, so it's run by the Ministry of Commerce. So I mean, there was just this lack of willingness to interfere with the very important things they should have done. So I think that was really a sad exit for a Norwegian company that did very many good things when they arrived, but did all the bad things when they left.
So then, as we continue to move forward in this story, I know as we're getting into the late 2010s, this is a period where the bubble has kind of burst. Aung San's star has started to fade, and the international community is starting to get a bit confused, confounded, disappointed, let down in some ways, starting to pull away, starting to realize Burma was not the fairy tale that it was set up to be. And so as we're starting to get to the 2020 election, the 2021 coup, where were you at? What were you doing? What were you seeing at this time in climate?
No, I was at that time working very hard with the political parties in the ethnic states, because what I thought was that 2015 was a referendum, and 2020 will probably give more votes to the ethnic minority parties, because many were disappointed by the NLD, and especially in the ethnic states. So I anticipated a better election from the ethnic parties, and we tried to facilitate dialogue because many of the parties would like to merge. But as mentioned, not all parties was able to. And you know, as it unfolded, the 2020 election gave even stronger mandate for NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi than 2015. So they was not able to reconcile. But I think that, you know, it's interesting to use Aung San Suu Kyi as an indicator on how we have been looking at her and Burma. And I think, you know, the first phase in the 90s, she was an icon. I mean, you know, in the Congress in the US, there was a picture of Aung San Suu Kyi all over the place, and it was kind of she was the beacon of hope. And when she took government, some got quite disappointed. After the Rohingya crisis, a lot of people got disappointed. So then she kind of she was criticized a lot. So she was definitely not an icon anymore. But what happened after the coup, I think, is that she has almost been forgotten, unfortunately, because it's hard for the people in the street to place her. I mean, she was icon before, and now she fall after the 2017 crisis. Then she's not as popular, and now it's hard to place her. Is she good or bad? Now she's in prison, and it's not so much attention in the public anymore. So I think that's a good indicator on also how we have been looking at Myanmar. You know, first with the kind of human rights centric approach, and then Realpolitik after 2015, and now it's, you know, just another conflict, just another totalitarian regime controlling a country, and Ukraine and Israel, Palestine, and even Iran has taken much of the attention. So it's not as much attention in the Norwegian public anymore on what's going on in Burma, unfortunately.
That's absolutely true, and it segues right into the next question I wanted to ask you. Where when I told a mutual Burmese friend, very well informed about the past several decades of Burmese history, about this interview coming up, her burning question to me was, ask them where Norway has been. Ask them what's going on with Norway. Like, she knows the history of, you know, where this came from in post-88 and the 90s and all the engagement, and kind of like, where is Norway now? What are they doing? What are they thinking, given where this came from? So that's the question to put to you, is what's your view of where is Norway now?
Oh, I will disappoint you so much and your friends. Sorry, because I don't know. Yeah. I don't know, because you know, Norway played a prominent role, you know, in the first phase, supporting Aung San Suu Kyi and DVB. They played a prominent role in the second phase, believing in Thein Sein's narratives. After Aung San Suu Kyi came to power, Norway has been there, but not as prominent because they didn't have the same political connections. And what the Norwegian government and Ministry of Foreign Affairs do now, I think they support civil society, and I think they try to continue. What I would like them to do is to kind of take their own position as a strong supporter of democracy and also the democratic movement. Yeah. Because I think the idea of trickling down effects and the middle class, it's almost dead. Because I mean, look at what we have now, what we now see with Russia invading Ukraine. It's a political conflict level that we haven't seen in ages. So it's now time to be more principled and say that, well, we would like to support democracy. We don't want to support a military leader that say that, well, just support me and I will take this country towards democracy and we will have business and everything will be fine. Working with the leadership, it's kind of real politics, but we need more like ideal politics in a way, a better balance, because what we have seen in Ukraine is ideal politics. I mean, if we should play real politics in Ukraine, in the first phase of the war, so many analysts said that, well, forget about it, Russia will win. I mean, it's a waste of time. Just bend over and say, well, now we need to find compromises. But they didn't, because they wanted to keep their nation safe and independent. So I have a slight hope that Norway and also other Western states will be more ideal when it comes to supporting the Burmese opposition, saying that, well, who are the political opposition, who can we support them, both building a party and preparing for the next phase, because I still hope that democracy, and I still believe that democracy will come at one place in history, and then we need to be prepared, because the worst thing is to work hard to achieve democracy, and when we have it, the institutions are not ready. So we need to make the political party institutions ready. We need to work with the true civil society working for political change. And I think I would like to tell a story, because we worked a lot with civil society actors in Mon states. And we gave a lot of money to very good projects. But the director said to me that, well, we have been working now for 10 years. And, with this kind of result-based management scheme, we cannot really say that we have achieved anything. We have done some civil society trainings. We have been reaching out to political parties. But, we haven't achieved anything. We cannot really prove that we have made any changes. But when the transitional phase came, then he called me and said, wow, we had this meeting, and I discovered that I have trained, almost half of the room of politicians, of civil society leaders. So, I mean, my point is that you can work for 10 years and apparently there are no results. But when an opening comes, when you have a democratic transitions, all these investments can actually be extremely beneficial for taking an opening to the next level, which is a solid democracy. So I really I miss Norway's position and role in taking a leading role, because we're a small nation. We have the Nobel Peace Prize, we have the legitimacy, and as you mentioned, you need legitimacy to achieve anything in Burma. You need to have been there for a long time. That's why I think that NBC was in a unique position as well, because we had been there since the 90s. People trusted in us, so we were able to open doors that nobody else were able to open, because we had that history behind us. And Norway, hopefully, even though they have been switching side a couple of times, I still hope and believe that it's possible to find back to to this strong support of democracy that Burma still desperately need.
I think that's such a great point that you shared, and something really to emphasize, because something I keep coming back to on this podcast with guests is this sense that when these things happen, whether they're opening transitions, whether they're 88, 07, 21, whatever they are, the movements aren't something coming out of nothing. And that's one of the huge, I think, misperceptions that the international community has. And even so-called well-informed people are under this kind of illusion that nothing is happening whatsoever. And then all of a sudden there's an opportunity and things just kind of organically spring. But when you really talk to the academics or the activists or the journalists who are interested in going deeper into the story, they're able to show how in the seemingly dead periods when nothing seems to be happening, all of that work is then directly related and impacted to those touchstone events that happen. So, even though even the casual Burma observer knows the touchstone events, so people who don't know much often know Aung San Suu Kyi or Saffron or something, or 88 or something, some little things to call onto. It's the real work is happening between those, and to then connect that point to Norway's engagement. One of the observations I've had in some of the discussions I've been having with Burmese diaspora in Norway, as well as Norwegians themselves, is this sense that this is a small country that is not a superpower on the international scene, but there is this real sense of pride and this real sense of importance and punching above your weight, that there is something that we can do. There is a role that we can play, and we can do something on the international scene, which is our contribution. It's a contribution that we can make, and we can make very well. And then that can be an opening or a bridge to the wider international kind of coming in and following in the stead of this one thing that we've done, which we can then take real pride in, that even as a small country, we have made this really important impact. And so putting those 2 points together and kind of an added push, knowing that we have members of the Norwegian government who listen to this podcast, really taking this opportunity to put those together to say that there is a way to kind of call back to those original times, and something different has to happen. I mean, we don't need a second DVB style platform, and Aung San Suu Kyi is not who she was then, and there's no one that is stepping right into her shoes. So there needs to be a new kind of analysis and a new kind of engagement in the current very complex context that's happening. But there is a way to look at and understand what this context is, and as a small country with good values going in and wanting to use this kind of in-between period, I don't know what you call it, but a period where maybe not much seems to be happening, at least, there's a lot happening with conflict, but not much seems to be happening with the democratic openings in civil society. But it is a perfect time to be able to reach out and talk to those people or those networks or those communities or those organizations that would then be in a position for that next touchstone period, which we know is going to happen, good or bad, we know is going to happen. And that kind of capacity building can happen now with foresight, so that when it does, we're not going to be surprised. We're not going to be running around trying to figure out who to talk to and making those wrong decisions, but to have those networks built up, which can then lead and segue to that.
Yeah, and I think that's looking forward, not looking back. I mean, even though Norway come from a position where we was very close to the democratic opposition, I think that the next phase now is to realize that we live in a time where the autocracies are gaining ground, and we need to take a political stand as democracies in the West and try to support those who would like an open society, and that requires a deliberate choice, going from a middleman, because Norway like to go into conflict and make the parties talk together, but out of that comes an interest to be neutral, not interfering too much with one of the sides, and that has been Norway's position for many years, and somehow that has been a good position for Norway to be in, because we are able to move into conflicts where maybe US could not interfere in the same way as a huge superpower. And Norway is a small country that can maneuver in spaces where other countries are not so able to do that. So I mean, it's a understandable logic, but for me, I think the next phase now is to try to do whatever we can as a small, democratic-minded, and a rather wealthy nation to invest in the democratic side to gain grounds again, because if dictatorships, autocracies are gaining ground, it also affects us, of course. I mean, at some point we see it already now. It's on our borders with Russia. I mean, so it's kind of, I think it's an evolving development where we see that we need to stand firmer on the democratic side, because supporting some totalitarian leaders that would like a bit of democracy so they can open up the economy, I think that has proven, if not wrong, so at least it has been challenged, given the fact that we now knew what happened in Myanmar. I mean, it moved forward to a certain spot, and then it didn't work anymore, because when the military saw that, well, we lose the first election, we lose the second election, now the only option to gain full control is a coup. And that was the limits of the military, probably from the start. It was so close to be completely successful. If they would have won the popular votes in 2020, you know, they would have won all they could dream of, both the civilian political power and the military power. And it was very close, not based on the election results, but I mean, all the different actions they have been doing, gaining support from the West, investments from the West, they really had followed the plan, and it worked until the point where they should ask permission from the voters, and they didn't want the military to rule, and it was very clear for two elections.
Yeah, right. I want to go back into some of your personal engagement and connection in Myanmar, because I understand that among your many friends and connections over in Myanmar, one is U Ko Ni. So I wonder if you can describe his background and your friendship with him.
No, I mean, U Ko Ni was really fantastic person, and smart, and he was the architect for Aung San Suu Kyi's political power after the constitution, because you know, Article 59F of the constitution did not allow Aung San Suu Kyi to lead the country as a president. But then U Ko Ni was the person who maneuvered and played with the constitution, because he knew it so extremely well. Wow. So he was the one that decided the state councillor title. And I remember I talked to him, and he said that, well, U Ko Ni had three different options. I don't remember the two other one, but then Aung San Suu Kyi responded immediately, "I take the state councillor," because you know, that was a title that kind of put her above the president, you know, inspired by the German council probably. So he did that, and he paid a very high price, because that was partly why he was assassinated, because he could play with the constitution. That was the kind of the military's Bible to power. They thought they had you know, got it all perfectly clear, but then he was able to crack it. And I met him several times. Every time I was in Yangon, I visited him at his office downtown. And he also came to Norway to discuss the Rohingya issue as well. And he was a guest in my home, and we had a dinner with my family. And so we got quite friendly. And I remember one moment where we met some activists in Norway. They were Muslims. And they were so angry with Aung San Suu Kyi on how she was dealing with Rohingya issue. That was before 2017. But Ko Ni was so good as a Muslim himself. He was able to kind of outline the political strategies and how the limitations need to be dealt with, because you couldn't just do whatever you wanted to do, given the fact that you had the military, which was very strong, and they had their limitations. So you could push it as much as you wanted, but it was not possible to go over the line. And I think that both U Ko Ni and also Aung San Suu Kyi knew very well where that line was drawn, and there was kind of despite the fact that the international community was very critical to Aung San Suu Kyi, I think she was quite close to the border and limitations that the military had kind of set up for her. So I think that Ukoni was brilliant as an advocate, as a legal advisor, and he knew how to play the military in that very spot that hurt the most, playing with their work, the constitution, that they thought should bring power to them forever, and he was able to crack that. So no, was a remarkable man, and for me, I think it was in January 2017 he was assassinated at the airport, and for me, I really realized how far the military was willing to go, and from that time I was very concerned about the political future, both for Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD political leadership, and also for people like Ukoni, that was not Buddhist but still engaging in politics.
Yeah, that was such a tragedy and such a shock when it happened. And then after the assassination at the airport in a public space in broad daylight, I believe he was holding his grandson at the time of the killing. Then the funeral that they had for him, famously Aung San Suu Kyi did not attend. What was your view on that?
No, I think that was sad. I think I'm not sure if you attended the election in 2015. I was there, and NLD won, and everyone was kind of pouring out to the streets around the NLD headquarters in Yangon, and they was waiting for Aung San Suu Kyi to come out and kind of hold her speech. She never came out, and the reason for that was she wanted to bring the energy in the crowd down because she was afraid of insulting the military. So she sent out one of the uncles and a terrible speaker, so people just went home. So I think that I'm not sure why she didn't show up at Ukoni's funeral, but maybe it was the same kind of logic behind, that she still wanted to be able to rule at least the civilian government, and she knew very well where the limitations for the military side was. I'm not sure. It might be other explanation as well. I was saddened by the fact that she was not there, and I'm not sure about her reasoning behind that decision.
Yeah, right. Another figure I'd like to prompt you about is Maung Munta. This is in relation to you co-organizing the Nobel Myanmar Literature Festival, and a number, we've been talking so much politically, but you've also been involved in literature, film, poetry, the arts, culture, etc. So if you can talk about Maung Munta and then maybe use that as a jumping off place to then go into some of the non-political, more cultural and arts that you were involved in.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many people in Burma that has inspired me immensely. Maung Munta was one of those as an intellectual, a writer. This magazine he had, People's Age magazine, I think it was called. And there was just an extremely generous person that was introducing me for the cultural environment in Yangon, with writers and poets and all kinds of intellectuals. So, and he also invited me to a session where he invited the whole 88 generation student leadership with the Minkonai and Kojimi and, Pyoncho, had a dinner and just talked about inputs for what was most important to write about. So, I mean, he was a generous, wonderful person that I really love to work with. And that also partly took me into the Nobel Myanmar Literature Festival. That was not my idea, it was the idea of DVB, actually. Some staff from the DVB that included different writers' organizations, and they wanted to have a literature festival based on Myanmar literature, but also have elements of international literature. And they use the Nobel name because it's linked to Norway and also, that you have a Nobel Prize for literature, not only peace. So we had that event 2 years, I think, 2 or 3 years. And that was also a wonderful experience where we brought different writers from Norway, and literature was translated from Norwegian to Burmese. And it was in the National Theatre of Yangon, and it was packed. And it's the first time I was on the front page of New Light of Myanmar, probably the only time as well. But then you had kind of military persons, and you had the ministry from the military government, you had opposition, you had even the chairperson of Norwegian Burma Committee, Harald Bøckmann, who had been a part of the work since the early 19th and still is a chairperson from DVB. He was there in the same photo as some military guys. So it was really a mind-blowing experience. And it was packed with people and discussions and vibrant debates. And at that time, there was a discussion about having a house of literature in Yangon, because in Oslo we have a wonderful house of literature where you have you have different seminar rooms, you have discussions, you have room for writers from abroad, from totalitarian countries that would like to just have a safe place to write. So it's very good. And so then I was going with the Yetut. He was the Minister of Information, and I got to know him because he had been in Norway with Thein Sein, and he was interviewed by DVB, and he actually borrowed my card to have a kind of training center so that he could exercise in Oslo, and he never canceled it, so I had to pay his bills for a month after. But the thing, this is a funny story only, because I mean he was part of the Thein Sein government, and he played a role, and politically we were quite distant from each other. But he said that they had some vacant buildings in Yangon, where I think there was an Indian writer that passed through Myanmar. He was having awarded a Nobel Prize of Literature as well. I don't remember his name. But then we went down there, had a look at the house, and we worked to be able to have this building as a house of literature in Yangon. But it didn't, as so many other things, it didn't happen because of many reasons. One reason was that the different writers' association and organizations, they were not able to collaborate, of course.
Yeah.
You know the story. And the association for what is it called? Because association, they are linked to the military side, and the organizations or whatever, they are linked to the opposition side. So those different fractions were not able to come together. But it was also some technical things with the government, and the negotiations with the ministry was not that easy. And the ministry would like to have a seat in the board, which was totally unacceptable both for us and for the writers. Trade unions. Unions was the word I was looking for. That was the opposition side. So it didn't succeed. But still, I think there are so many initiatives that kind of evolved almost by accident in those days, which was very inspiring, and I'm very grateful to have been a part of.
Yeah. So the last thing I'd like to ask you about is just your engagement with Myanmar and just the extreme challenges and conditions that those there have faced. One of the things that you've noticed and called out has been the sense of humor that has animated that. Can you describe what form this humor takes and what role it then plays in this kind of continuing the morale of the resistance movement?
Yeah, no, there are so many times in Burma where you face tragedy, and the Burmese people are laughing at it in a fantastic way. And I think that I'm very humble saying this, but I think that it really makes me laugh. And first time I was in Burma, it was in 1998. I went to Mandalay with the Mustache brothers, and they was telling a lot of jokes about the regime, and then they were arrested, and they just told so many funny jokes about that. But I remember I was invited to Royal Rose, which was a place where the opposition used to meet, and I was invited by the writer Matida, because there was a reunion of former political prisoners. And I was expecting a really sad evening, of course. Because it's a tragic thing to be arrested and being a political prisoners, and for many they didn't cope with it and suffering a lot. But when I came into that venue, there was just karaoke and so much fun in that room. And I remember they told this story about when the prisoners was able to smuggle out a bloody T-shirt from insane prison, I think it was, with a message to the UN, some UN conference in Geneva or New York or wherever. And there was just, they was just laughing so much of how they was able to smuggle it out, how furious the Guardians was, and the success of seeing this in the news, that they hold the very T-shirt they have been smuggling out at the UN conference. So I just find these moments very valuable and precious, that you're able to laugh of tragedies, but also silly things. I think it's partly because you are on the right side of history, that you are able to laugh of this stupidity of the military side. And I also find it very amusing that dictators, they're obsessed with power, but the rest they just don't care about. For instance, I think it's very funny that in Burma you have cars with steering wheel on the right side and steering wheel on the left side. Even if you drive on the right side of the road, if you go with a taxi, and the taxi driver has the steering wheel on the right side and you sit on the left side, and this guy is going to pass another car, you can see as a passenger, but it will not work because it's coming a car against you. But the driver is not seeing anything because it's placed on the wrong side of the car. This kind of silly things that these governments are doing. I think I find it very amusing, and I have the deepest respect for the Burmese people that are able to laugh about it in a very difficult situation.
It's a lot that we can learn from that, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think for me the main thing is that you need to listen very carefully to the Burmese people. They have millions of different views. I think if you are in a position where you take political decisions, even if you are a Norwegian diplomat or foreign minister, it's easy to take decision if you have a shallow understanding of what's going on, because then it seems so easy. It's much harder to spend a lot of time talking to a lot of people, different views, and then take a decision, because then you have all these kind of different persons and view to relate to. And I think that politicians and people working with foreign politics abroad, they really need to be humble and take their time to learn that the decision is extremely difficult to take. But when you take them, there's no such thing that everyone will be happy about that decision, but you can do it because you have talked to so many different stakeholders and you can stand firmly behind that decision. I think that's the main takeaway for me after working 10 years professionally on Burma and being personally committed to the Burmese fight for democracy for 30 years.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Insight Myanmar Podcast. Each episode we produce is offered freely, and always will be. Our goal is to inform, engage, and inspire as many people as possible with stories and voices that matter. And thanks to your support, we've been able to reach tens of thousands of listeners across the globe, and this is truly remarkable. But to sustain this momentum, we need your help. Even if just a small percentage of our listeners committed to a very modest monthly pledge, we would not only be able to sustain our momentum, but grow. Even better, you might consider becoming a member to deepen your engagement with this platform and thereby gain access to additional content and other exclusive benefits. So, if you found value in what we offer and want to help secure the future of this work, however you want to make that happen, please visit insightmyanmar.org/donation to make a pledge, or navigate to insightmyanmar.org/membership to look at our member options. With your help, we can keep this work alive and thriving.
Oba yarananda dayananga na yarana ya dayanana boda ba yarana no